Welcome to another episode of How to Pose Your Action Figures by fxfranz chefatron. And today, for this episode, we will be discussing lessons on how to pose your 3.75-inch figures, more likely the 4.5-inch figures, 4.5-inch figures, or the figures in the 1/18th scale, which is Star Wars, G.I. Joes, Marvel Universe, Vitruvian hacks, the figures you grew up as a kid back in the 80s and some parts of the 90s. So let's get right to it. Posing these figures, these 4-inch figures, can be a lot of fun, really, especially if you have figures that are fully articulated. Excuse me, there's a lot of dust. A lot of articulation for figures made in the early 2000s. Figures were given tons of articulation, and that was quite a delight for a lot of people who made dioramas, for people who posed figures like me. They were a lot of fun. God, this thing's dusty. So you can get him in a lot of poses, and the key thing to posing these figures is to use what you have. Make do with what you have. You just like in life, you get a hand that you're dealt with, and you make the best of it. And one very key important point in articulating these figures, as my good buddy Christian always says, is to use the waist swivel. The waist swivel allows you to get it in several dynamic poses without sacrificing, while still allowing the figure to stand and not requiring a lot of the flight stands or whatnot. The waist swivel gives it more dimension, gives the pose more character, and you can use that. But there are some instances when you don't have the waist swivel, and we'll talk about that later, what you can do about it. So even with figures with a lot of articulation, you can go crazy with it. But even with figures with limited articulation, as long as you have the essential articulations of the neck, the waist, shoulders, elbows, knees, and hips, not even the ankle articulation, these are not necessary, but just the basic points of articulation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points of articulation, that's you can already get your figure in some substantial poses. Granted, it's not the best pose you can do with a figure, but you can get the figure in interesting poses. So use that waist swivel. Now, well, as I mentioned, figures with tons of articulation, go crazy with them. I mean, use every bit of articulation. This one, I think, has 20 points of articulation. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 points of articulation. You just use every single bit of it, and you can get the figure in just in any pose you want. Marvel, this is from the Marvel Universe line. G.I. Joe, love to pose these G.I. Joes. G.I. Joe figures they were one of the first figures that really went ahead of their time back in the 80s. Hasbro really did something with these G.I. Joe figures with all the articulation. Not this one, but back in the day, they had a ton of articulation, which the Kenner figures did not have, Galoob figures did not have, and that's why nowadays Hasbro has been very cautious about using the multi-articulated figures and just resorting to the 5 points of articulation, mainly due to cost and all that. And these figures that have fantastic articulation are left to exclusives, but these are the best figures to pose. You can get them in a ton of poses. And again, as I said, use every bit of articulation. Use what you have. Use every bit of point of articulation. Now, let's go to the 5 points of articulation. I'm sure a lot of you are curious. Well, there's really not much you can do. I'll have to admit, this has got to be my kryptonite. 5 points of articulation. I've been trying to pose them, but because of the limited number of articulation, there's really not much you can do except standing poses and weapon wielding poses. But even so, use what you have. Most of these figures have ball jointed necks, and you can use that to your advantage. Even you don't have to just point the weapon straight like that. You can do that. You can have them standing up, but you want to give it a little bit of character. Tilt the head, tilt the neck, maybe spread the legs a bit by just moving them apart, moving them backwards, and they'll sort of move apart. Put the arm at the back. Don't just give the arm, the other arm, the idle arm, like that. You can move it at the back to give it a little bit of a dimension or a little bit of a character to its pose, and you can still pull off a decent enough pose instead of your regular standing pose. So yeah, put him here. Not too bad. Now I want to talk about a few hacks that I have for figures with articulation or limited amount of articulation. For instance, Clone Troopers, Clone Wars figures, there are a lot of articulation for them. Fantastic points of articulation, the upper body, lower limbs, but they don't have the ball hinge hips. They only have the swivel hips. So if you have swivel hips and you want to create the illusion that you have ball jointed hips, assuming this figure has the waist swivel, what you can do is you move the hips, you move one leg forward and one leg backward, as though that's your split. That's like you're going to pretend that that's the ball, that's the figure making a split with a ball hinge joint. And then you rotate, assuming you have knee joints, you rotate the knees in the same direction. And, wow, I got rid of that. Rotate the neck and the waist. And you will get an effect that it's like he's having those outward joints for the legs. It's a simple hack, especially if you have a very thin waist. You can do it, and it actually looks good on your shelf. So that's one hack. The other hack that I wanted to talk about is, well, there are a lot of figures that have kibble and are very, very bulky. And the best way to pose them really is just to spread out the arms. Get them in wide poses. That way you get rid of the kibble getting in the way, or all these beefy parts are not getting in the way. So you just get them in very, very wide poses. Extend the limbs, extend the arms, extend the legs, and the kibble won't be a problem. So yeah. Okay. And finally, one last hack that I thought would be important is if you don't have a waist swivel. Now, I know my good buddy Christian is going to be, God, why can't you get a waist swivel? He's going to be all over this. He's really particular about the waist swivel. Me, even without the waist swivel, there is a way to create an illusion that he has waist swivel, as long as you have a neck swivel and some decent amount of articulation in the limbs. So for instance, the Beast, no waist swivel, but you can position the neck and the arms so that he's got a little bit of waist. It feels like he's swiveling his waist. And that way you can put him in still a dynamic pose. And you got to cheat with the legs, the arms, and the neck. The same is true for other figures. Captain Marvel, you want to get her in a flight pose, but you don't have a flight stand. There is still a way you can balance her. Make sure you have the arms, the same technique, the arms and the neck and the limbs. Can get that. It's still a decent pose. Back it up. Other figures, Sharon Carter, can just make her point sidewards. Pick a side for her to choose from, and this way that lack of waist swivel isn't much of a factor. Excuse me, I gotta just stand. So not too bad. Black Panther, the new one. I'm gonna do a review of these shortly. You still can't, same technique as the Beast. You put the arms, cross the arms, the legs, and use a lot of the neck swivel. And this way you can get the figure still in a dynamic pose, even without the waist swivel. So there you go, folks. Posing these figures can be a lot of fun. Just be patient, and again, use what you have. There are figures that have limitations, sure, but that shouldn't stop you from posing your action figures in any pose you want to get them in. I mean, figures with great articulation can be posed dramatically. You can use the bases if you want to. If you don't have a flight stand, you can still get them there. And yes, even figures with 5 points of articulation can still be a lot of fun. You can still get them in kooky poses and whatnot. And yeah, so there you go, folks. Just have fun with it, and you know what, go ahead. It's your figures. Make use of what you have. Pick the figures you want to pose. The best ones are the ones with full articulation, but even with limited articulation, you can still get them with the hacks I've taught you. And just go have fun with it. These are great figures, and they're meant to be posed or played with. Just have a ball with them. So until next time, keep posing those action figures.